It was a crisp October afternoon when Lily and Michael pulled up to the house, a charming, ivy-covered two-story nestled on the outskirts of a quiet town. They had found the place by chance after searching for months, a real estate listing buried among overpriced properties and tiny apartments. The house was perfect, or so it seemed. With its creaking wood floors, antique windows that cast warm light, and a garden full of roses in full bloom, it looked like something out of a dream. "We did it," Lily whispered, squeezing Michael's hand as they stood at the front door for the first time. "Our new beginning." Michael smiled, kissed her forehead, and together they stepped inside, the door creaking behind them as if the house itself welcomed them into its embrace. For weeks, they had dreamed of moving to the countryside, far away from the noise and stress of the city. They were newlyweds, full of hope and excitement for their future. The house was supposed to be their sanctuary, a place where they could build a life, raise a family, and grow old together. It was the kind of home that seemed to hold stories in its walls, and Lily loved that about it. That first night, they settled into their cozy, new bedroom. The faint smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of the roses Lily had picked from the garden and placed in a vase by the window. They toasted with cheap wine, laughing as they reminisced about their wedding just a few months before. It was a quiet, peaceful evening, but as the clock struck midnight, the peacefulness shattered. Bang! Lily sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering in her chest. She nudged Michael, who was half asleep, barely registering the sound. "Michael, did you hear that?" He stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" Lily strained her ears, listening intently, but the house had fallen silent again. She shook her head, trying to convince herself it was nothing. "It was probably just the house settling," she said quietly, lying back down. "Old houses make noises," Michael mumbled his agreement, pulling her close, and within minutes, his steady breathing told her he was asleep again. But Lily remained wide awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange unease creeping over her. The next day, they were busy with unpacking boxes and setting up the house. By the time the sun set, they were exhausted. The memory of the sound from the night before seemed distant, easily explained by the house's age and the newness of their surroundings. But that night, as the clock crept toward midnight, the sound returned. Bang! 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 This time, Michael heard it too. He shot up in bed, frowning as he glanced at the clock. "Did you hear that?" Lily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "It sounded like it came from the basement," Michael sighed, pulling on his robe. "Probably something fell over." "Let's check." They grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made their way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet now, the only sounds the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet and the occasional whisper of the wind outside. The basement door stood at the end of a narrow hallway, barely illuminated by the flashlight beam. When they reached it, Michael hesitated. He tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he muttered, confused. "I didn't even know we had a key for this," Lily frowned. "Didn't the realtor say the previous owners left everything unlocked?" After a few moments of struggle, Michael finally managed to force the door open. A rush of cold, damp air greeted them as they stepped inside. The flashlight's beam danced across the dusty shelves, old furniture, and cobweb-covered beams. Everything was still, untouched. They searched the basement thoroughly, checking every corner, but there was no sign of anything that could have made the noise. Nothing seemed out of place. After nearly an hour, they gave up, heading back upstairs with no answers. "Maybe it's the pipes," Michael suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Lily nodded, though her mind was far from settled. Something about the basement unnerved her, but she couldn't put her finger on what. For the next several nights, the noises continued. Sometimes it was a single loud bang, other times it was more rapid, a series of knocks, like someone was hammering on the walls. Always, it seemed to happen around the same time, just past midnight. They kept investigating, but every time they searched the basement, it was the same, nothing. The couple became more and more agitated. The house, which had once felt like a warm, welcoming place, began to feel oppressive. Lily found herself glancing over her shoulder constantly, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each passing day. Michael, too, seemed on edge. They barely spoke about the noises anymore, each too afraid to voice their growing fears aloud. One night, after another series of loud bangs, Michael sat up in bed, determination written on his face. "This isn't normal," he said, his voice low. "We're missing something. We need to figure out what's going on down there." Lily, exhausted from the sleepless nights, agreed. "But how? We've searched every inch of the basement. There's nothing down there." Michael frowned, deep in thought. "What if we're not looking in the right place? There might be something hidden." The next morning, they prepared for a full-scale investigation. Armed with flashlights, tools, and a crowbar, they descended into the basement. This time, they wouldn't leave until they had answers. They started with the walls, tapping for hollow spaces, but everything seemed solid. They moved old furniture, rifled through dusty boxes, and sifted through every corner. Hours passed, and frustration began to settle in. It wasn't until they reached the farthest corner of the basement that Lily noticed something odd. One of the floorboards looked newer than the rest. She crouched down, running her fingers along the edges. "Michael, look at this." Michael hurried over, kneeling beside her. "It's been replaced," he murmured, his brow furrowing. With the crowbar, they pried up the floorboard. Beneath it was a small trapdoor, covered in dust and cobwebs. The hinges were rusted, as if it hadn't been opened in years. They exchanged a glance, unease tightening in their stomachs, but they couldn't stop now. Michael slowly lifted the door, revealing a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. "I don't like this," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Michael nodded, swallowing hard. "Neither do I. But we have to know." The tunnel was cramped and cold, the walls damp and covered in roots. It smelled of earth and decay, the air thick and heavy. They crawled through it, Michael leading the way, his flashlight flickering as they moved deeper underground. Lily's heart raced, fear clawing at her chest with every inch they moved forward. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. It opened into a small, dimly lit room. Michael swept the flashlight across the space, and froze. In the corner, huddled against the wall, was a man. He was gaunt, his clothes torn and dirty, his hair long and matted. His eyes were wide with fear as he squinted into the light. He raised a trembling hand to shield his face, as if he hadn't seen light in months. "Oh my God," Lily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael stood frozen, staring at the man in disbelief. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The man didn't respond at first, his breathing ragged and shallow. He looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "Help. Me." His name was Thomas, and the story he told them was more horrifying than they could have ever imagined. Years ago, he had lived in the house with his brother. They had been close once, but over time, his brother had grown paranoid, convinced that Thomas was trying to betray him. One night, in a fit of madness, his brother had attacked him, knocking him unconscious and dragging him into the basement. He had locked Thomas in the underground room, sealing him away from the world. For months, Thomas had been trapped there, surviving on rainwater that dripped through the ceiling and the occasional scraps of food his brother left. But one day, his brother stopped coming. Thomas had been alone ever since, slowly wasting away in the darkness. "I tried to get out," Thomas rasped, his voice cracking with emotion. "I banged on the walls. I screamed. But no one heard me." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. All those nights they had heard the banging, it had been Thomas, desperately trying to get their attention. "We have to get you out of here," Michael said urgently, helping the frail man to his feet. The police arrived soon after, and an investigation revealed that Thomas's brother had died in a car accident months before. No one had known about the underground room, and over the years, the house had changed hands, each owner unaware of the terrible secret hidden beneath the floorboards. Thomas, though weak and malnourished, was alive, thanks to the couple's determination to uncover the truth. As they stood outside, watching the paramedics take Thomas away, Lily and Michael couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The house, which had once felt like a dream, now seemed like something out of a nightmare. They returned inside, the basement door now locked and silent. But as they lay in bed that night, neither of them could sleep. The quiet was deafening, and the weight of what they had uncovered pressed heavily on their hearts. "Do you think we'll ever hear that noise again?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible in the dark. Michael squeezed her hand. "No," he said quietly. "But I don't think we'll ever forget it." And as the night stretched on, the house stood still, but the ghosts of its past lingered in every corner, refusing to be forgotten.